are there any changes, amendments or changes to the document? Nope. Okay. All right, so let's go to a roll call vote for approval of the August 17th, 2020 minutes. Steve,
Yes.
Jason,
Yes.
Shauna,
Yes.
Nicola? She says she's connected to audio. Okay, I approve. Nicola, are you with us?
Oh my gosh.
Ah, wait, now, Nicola? Ah, there we go.
Hi, Sherry.
Hi,
Hello,
we-
everyone.
Okay, we're just voting on the approval of the August 17th, 2020 minutes. Do you have any changes or comments or anything like that?
No.
Okay, so are you voting to approve them?
Yes.
Okay, great. All righty, so now we can move on to old business. The first item on the agenda is the Housing Trust Fund revenue sources. Shauna, do you have an update?
I do not. And in fact, I should have really looked at the agenda more ahead of time than an hour before. So I felt like from looking at the minutes that we had a very complete conversation. So if there are updates from others, like for instance, Glenn about the transient guest lodging tax that we talked about, or whatever, if anybody has updates on what we talked about from last meeting, yeah, that's great. What I did do was table the discussion about uses for the Housing Trust Fund. So if we wanted to have that conversation, I think that's more the item that should be on the agenda, but if there are updates from others, I would love to hear it.
Okay, I was gonna address the discussion with Glenn when we got to the new business topic of the 2020 goals. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Okay, and he's not here anyway, so at this point, it's moot. Okay, so the homeless shelter, that's the next item on the agenda. After trading a number of emails about eviction issues during COVID-19 lockdown, I began a conversation with Brad Hoblitzel of FRC about that issue and possible need for a homeless shelter in Oxford. As you know, this applied to number 5 on our list of priorities for 2020. Nicola had mentioned in a few of our previous HAC meetings about the reticence of some of our residents to go to Hamilton, Fairfield, or Cincinnati when they were looking for shelter after becoming homeless. Homelessness has been a problem for quite a while here, and there has in the past been an active organization involved in a solution. Realizing the problem would be exacerbated by the pandemic, FRC began to contact successful shelter organizations here in Butler County. In August, we toured the HIT Foundation in Eaton, and Nicola reported on that trip. Subsequently, we had a Zoom meeting with Rick Incorvati, who used to be involved with the Interfaith Hospitality Organization in Springfield, Ohio, and he told us about the early days of their homeless outreach. Later, we also talked to Charlie Bush of that same organization, and he filled us in on the origins of their outreach efforts. About this time, both Ann Fuhrer from TOPS and Jason became heavily involved with this and additional issues involving the homeless. They were, with Brad, Nicola, and I, tackling long-term plans as well as short-term solutions to see how quickly we can get a program in place. At one point, we began a discussion with the model group, who has built a number of shelters in the area, for a permanent shelter, perhaps on the Mary Day property. The impetus for all of this is the CARES money that is coming to the city, some of which is being distributed to nonprofits here in Oxford. Additionally, we are looking at a possible solution involving the purchase of one of the smaller hotels here and converting it to a shelter, or alternatively, purchasing a few houses that have been underutilized and are for sale within the mile square. As you can see, this is a machine with many moving and varied parts, and because funding is dependent on being used by the end of 2020, there's a rush to use it properly and wisely. And now, Jason, if you could talk about the CARES money and how it applies.
Sure, yeah. We have till, I think it's December 28th to have it spent. It can't just be allocated or set aside for, it has to actually be spent. And obviously, in a time of evictions and a pandemic, sheltering makes complete sense as a goal and fits right in with our goal and also one of City Council's major goals. There's not too much to it to that.
Okay. Now, we welcome any thoughts that any of you might have about the issues described here.
Yeah, I would love for us to have a discussion on the options that you already laid out, how reasonable they are. And then also if there's any other additional ideas. And one that came out during council meeting was David suggesting not necessarily the purchase of a motel, but maybe a sort of co-ownership that could sort of help with maintenance. So we can, basically own a portion of the rooms of a motel, which makes a lot of sense if that's feasible, I think. But I'd like to discuss it with everyone so we can get some more ideas and see how viable the ideas already put out are.
Okay, Nicole.
Yeah, Jessica Green met with Brad, and another option was renting out about 10 rooms for the next 3 years at one of the inns. So slightly different from buying out the whole thing or owning part of it. So that was another option that was suggested. And also renting out, and that you mentioned, Sherry, renting out a few houses or apartments, again, for as a means of transitional housing. But each of these places would have limits to which the families could stay in while they worked on finding more permanent housing. So even at one of the inns, it would be maybe 2 weeks. I don't know what the houses or the apartments would be, but there would be a time limit on how long the families could live in there.
Do you mean as part of rules that the FRC would put down for use or coming from somewhere else?
Not necessarily the FRC. I think it comes through the city. With renting out, say, rooms at a hotel. And I can clarify that with Brad some more.
Yeah, I would like some clarification on why the city would be imposing that exactly and the rules around it.
Yeah, we'll get some more information on that. Definitely, we will. I was not part of that conversation, so Brad and I have talked very briefly about it. We haven't gone into too many details, but I'll get more information.
I think I like the idea of a long-term lease of space, number of rooms, as opposed to an ownership, which then implies an unknown cost of operation and of ongoing repairs and upkeep. So I really like that approach. And I was curious, having listened to the conversation in the work session, that Jessica was going to reach out to see if either of the inn owners were even willing to consider selling, which we didn't know. But I'm hopeful that some kind of an agreement could be arranged with them. I don't necessarily like the idea of uptown housing unless it is an apartment, a multi-apartment unit. Some of the older ones that I can visualize, but I don't know exactly where they're located. There's one structure that's somewhat motel-like in the way it sits along an alleyway. I just don't like the idea of multiple families having to share the same household. It seems dangerous.
Yeah, Steve, I think one of the issues that we're confronting is the time frame on the money. That would mean that we would be dumping a lot of money into hotel rooms
right
by the end of the year, with the understanding that they would be, I mean, we need them year round, but we need them a lot more in the winter, and to try to work out the agreement on that would be a little difficult, and they would then have the money ahead of time.
Right.
Understood. I still think it's a reasonable option.
Okay.
Oh, I definitely think it's a reasonable option. I mean, any of these are beneficial, right? There's a need and we can address some of it. I lean a little bit more towards ownership, especially if there could be an ownership agreement that includes maintenance and things like that. But I mean, there's cost savings to owning instead of renting. And also I know a lot of people are shy because of what has happened with other properties the city has ended up owning when things fall apart. And obviously the city wouldn't own this unless it wouldn't be able to be maintained. But getting rid of it, I think would be much easier. So in other situations, we were sort of forced to purchase a property and then you wouldn't want to sell it at any price because you would lose money on it. In this situation, if we were forced to do that, which would hopefully never happen, is definitely not the plan. We could get rid of it for whatever. You know, we wouldn't have that obligation to try to meet what we already purchased it for. Does that make sense? A lot of people are gun shy after what happened to the Knowles property. And this doesn't really relate to that, I don't think.
Does anyone know if there was any discussion of who would be the one to deal with the management of the, screening the people who would need it? Because I understand the initial benefit of capital costs, saving that, and the environmental benefit of utilizing a building that's already existing versus, building new and hauling in all those materials. But, from an operational standpoint, someone has to be the one to, deal with tenant issues, just like anyone else. So there's a longer term operational cost that needs to be considered that Jessica probably has already covered with Brad, or whoever the parties are.
Yeah, I think they've talked briefly, but I don't think they've got that far in terms of details. So
Okay.
in fact, Brad's just gone over to the budget in right now
I see.
to start the initial conversation.
Very good.
So yeah, I don't think they got that far in terms of talking about operating and stuff. So
But it
it's
seems
the time frame. Everything seems rushed.
it is, otherwise we lose the opportunity to address these needs at all, right?
Right.
But it seems the options there would be either that sort of worked into whatever purchase agreement we have, that they run it, or that FRC would find a way to maintain those costs going
Right.
forward.
My other concern is with people that are repeat users and really have no intention of moving into a longer term plan. I don't think that's a housing question, but I do think that somehow we should recognize that some discussion has to be held about the tough love decisions that need to happen for people who are just using resources to their benefit and not really with a consideration of an improved lifestyle. And I hate to even think that there are people like that, but after 40 years in the business, I know there are.
Yeah, Nicola, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, what Steve says is absolutely true. In fact, we do have a few people like that, and we've tried very, very hard to work with them to get them into permanent housing. In fact, there's a young lad that was homeless the other day, and we have him right now at one of the inns, and trying to get him into a jobs program that we're starting tomorrow. And he was supposed to meet one of the people here today. And, part of our deal was I'll be honest, to come to this program while we're housing you here, but he didn't show up today. And he's had a long history of living in different shelters. He's been in touch with all the people we've usually reached out to outside Oxford to find housing for people. So yes, I mean, there are the people who definitely require some tough love, and then there are others who, one great example of somebody we've helped move into an apartment. She's found a job and she's just doing really well in the 1 month that we've helped her along. So yes, there are all kinds of people.
So
Go
I
ahead.
just wanted to say, none of the stuff associated with a purchase would be new to FRC, right? You've been giving people permission and providing the resources to stay in motels and other areas for a very long time. So the vetting process is not new. In fact, this is just a continuation of what normally happens, right?
It is.
Yeah. So, and the other thing that, oh, sorry, did you want to add
No,
stuff?
but typically because we didn't have a budget for hotel stays. I mean, we typically always wanted people to find apartments so that we could, help towards that. And typically hotel stays were kept for people in real emergencies. So if there was a fire, something was really out of sorts, then yes. But there have been people who have taken some advantage of it in the past. And, it's a fine line to walk, and it's a fine, it is, sometimes it is a tough love decision, but I mean, we try to do our best. So, yeah.
So that actually goes into my second point. So one, I do think you have some experience with that, and I do understand it's a fine line. Myself, from a moral position, if we have the resources and it's not harming anyone else, and the alternative is that they're just on the street, I
Right.
have no problem providing them that, right? So if we owned a section, the FRC owned a section of rooms, and the person, let's say, well, one's a motivational thing. Like, you can put down requirements, right? You have to go to this jobs training, you have to do this. And that
Right.
could be a motivator to help get them on their feet. But let's say that's not working. Well, if we have a room, they're not going to trash the room, they're not a threat to anyone else, and we can keep them off the street, which, by the way, is many homeless people, because they often have mental illnesses that go unaddressed. They often have various ailments and issues that can't be met, right?
Right.
I don't mind housing them. In fact, that's still one of my goals, that everybody has a roof over their heads, right? So, but I would trust the FRC to make decisions on that. That's sort of where I'm at.
Sherry, if I may, maybe it might be a good idea, since all of this has happened pretty quickly, maybe as a group, I know it wasn't on the agenda to necessarily vote on it, but it might mean something to the rest of council and to administration if you all voted on, recommending that council, continue pursuing CARES Act money for this. And then you could deliver that, or I could, in whatever form necessary.
I think that would be great.
I would like to move that we communicate to City Council that a significant portion of the CARES Act monies not yet allocated be used to provide cold shelter and longer term housing for homeless in Oxford, if at all possible.
Okay, Steve has moved. Is there a second? Jason, seconds. Okay, roll call, all in favor. Steve,
Yes.
Jason,
Yes.
Nicola,
Yes.
Shauna,
Yes.
and me, yes. Okay, does that work for you, Sam?
Yep, that works. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Just to mention something that I think I read in the journal recently, that the Shalom Project in Middletown, which had relied on churches, has unfortunately decided to end.
Yeah.
Yep, I read that and talked about that at one of the meetings recently.
Yeah,
I
Brad.
think it was mostly COVID related. They didn't want to be a transmitter as opposed to financial and other issues.
Yeah, Brad
But
had
still a
been
shame either way because they need it now more than ever. And all the other homeless areas, homeless institutes that are addressing that are going to have to take on a lot more, some of which they might not be able to handle.
Yeah, Brad had been trying to connect with them to see how they were running for a number of months and had not been successful. Okay, any further discussion about the homeless shelter? All right,
I'll just speak a little more on the ownership.
all
I
right.
just like the idea of having it going forward as long as it can be maintained as opposed to having it run out after so many years. I think the cost savings are beneficial, and it's just a longer term investment, you know, as opposed to something that's going to cut off and we might lose that option altogether. So if it's feasible, I would sort of lean towards ownership, but especially if we can do something where it's a worked out agreement that can maintain and maybe even run, you know, the ins and outs, right? It could still be treated like a motel. We'll just have a vetting process maybe on the front end. Does anybody else have any other ideas other than what we've mentioned in between ownership, co-ownership, and transitional housing? Seems like a good time to get creative, but that's as much as I've come up with so far.
Well, it's too bad we're missing two of our members because I think that both of them would be very good in coming up with ideas about this.
I could chime in there a little bit if it's okay.
Oh, please, Sam, whenever you have something. And Little House has also been talked about before too, so that's another route.
Good. So probably a realtor or developer would suggest a condominium regime or horizontal property regime, which is very common in urban areas, not necessarily for this purpose, but that would probably be a tool that if David was the one who mentioned partial ownership, where you would actually convert the hotel to a commercial condominium association. And what that does is allows the building, portions of the building that kind of hover above the land to be bought and sold like separate real estate. And so essentially each of the hotel units could be individually bought and sold. That requires a lot of attorney fees to set that up. But it might be feasible. And that's probably what David was thinking without putting it in those terms. But we do have several condominium type developments in Oxford. Only a couple commercial that I'm aware of, mostly residential. But anyway, that's the tool that property developers would use for that type of thing.
Would that require rezoning, Sam?
No, it wouldn't. It's essentially all done through the county auditor and through private attorneys.
That sounds great, though. That seems really versatile, where we could purchase more, sell rooms off as necessary, and maybe also have in sort of, at least how I know condominiums work, they have all sorts of shared resources in terms of maintenance and things like that.
Right. Yep. But it is very expensive for the attorney fees because of all the legal ramifications that everyone wants to have in place to protect all the parties.
Right. And your individual deals always makes it more expensive.
Yep. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank
Sam.
you. Please speak up if you have any good ideas. You're incredibly knowledgeable about this stuff, so.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, let's move on to the Western Knolls. Sam?
Yeah, thanks again. So City Council did authorize staff to enter into discussions on a purchase agreement. So congratulations to us to getting to that point. So I know that and for Nicole's benefit and Jason too, this conversation started many years ago. So hats off to Housing Advisory and to planning staff, council. There's been a lot of work in getting it to that point, even though there was only one proposal submitted August 28th. It still is a step. And so Doug has given me the opportunity to continue working with Model Group, who was the proposer, and a sub-proposer is the Senior Center. And I should note too that Steve and I had some communication about this, that he won't be involved in discussions on this. And I know there was no intention for a vote today. on this item. So I assured him that wouldn't be a problem. Since there's no voting, he could still talk about it. But if he seems quiet, that's why. So we are actively working with Model Group as the primary proposer for 10 of the 47 acres to sell that. And we don't know exactly what the timing will be. The amount offered was a little bit more than what the city had required as a low end on the threshold. And the original proposal included 50 affordable units for seniors. And the funding would be through OFA. That's the acronym for Ohio Finance. And there's the developer would actually be Episcopal Retirement Services, who you all, I'm sure, are familiar with or heard of, that have been looking at Oxford for many years. And they partner with the developer Model Group. Both are very reputable and well-known in the area entities and have done many, many projects. So they have very solid finances. We hope to be working out a solid agreement to present to City Council. I'm thinking it probably will not be October 6th. It'd probably be more likely to be October 20th for an ordinance for council to actually vote on, for first reading, unless there's an emergency determined. And then February is the cycle that Episcopal Retirement and Model Group uses with Ohio Finance to review the applications, and then the determinations are made in May of each year. So their hope is to, one, submit the application by that date, and they would need to have a signed purchase agreement and some type of zoning authorization from the city. And then they would find out in May as to whether they are scored high enough to get funding from Ohio Finance. And they are also offering the option of delaying until 2022 as well, if for some reason the 2021 round is too competitive and they don't score well. So there's a lot to be negotiated still, but we're going to do as much as we can on the staff level to work with them and then present something to City Council that we think would be acceptable to the elected officials, but also in the public trust as well for the publicly owned land. So a lot of steps to go through, but it's something that is high priority for Doug that we're working on nearly every day right now. So that's a pretty detailed update, but I know it's been of high interest to this group. So I wanted to give you some of the background.
So Sam, with the stuff that taking that piece aside, the rest of the property, weren't there a large number of downloads of the RFP?
Yeah, that's actually fairly common. We had, I think, 18 downloads. So, some of the folks may have just wanted to see what was out there, and they may, try to propose something later to see if we do another outreach or not. Sometimes, and this happens with many public projects, is you have several parties actually working together. And so only one of the, say, half dozen might actually submit the proposal, but they've got several architects, engineers, and consultants working together. But they all download everything separately. So it looks like we would get more than what we actually did. I was thinking we might get a 2 or 3, but we only got the 1. So hopefully, and as Councilor Snavely, Vice Mayor Snavely mentioned, that hopefully this would actually kind of, spur additional proposals in the future. It remains to be seen yet whether legally we need to actually do another full-blown RFP, or we can simply accept proposals and review them. So that would be a good problem to have if we had that to deal with. So we will see.
Well, it is a weird economy in that people are skittish, but the interest rate is so low at this point that you would think it would encourage people to think about projects like this.
Yeah, commercial real estate, maybe not so much, but the risk since the last recession, banks have gotten a lot stricter with their requirements, but on single family residential, definitely, there's a lot of real estate moving in that area. I think the sign still says contact Alan Kiger. So regardless, we need to get that, changed. So if people are driving by or in the area, they can realize, just kind of refresh it a little bit.
So Alan has been getting all the calls. That's just what's going on.
Well, yeah, I think that's got his office. So hopefully people are getting it to Jessica, but yeah.
Yeah, and it's a parallel to the street sign. And I was wondering, why they didn't do like a V sign, so that as people coming from both directions, it would be in their eyesight, direct eyesight, rather than having to look to the right to see the sign.
If I remember correctly, the right of way is really wide right there. So it was probably just to save on cutting down of trees to have room for that. But yeah, when we need to take a look at that and do a new sign, even if I have to pay for it out of my budget, it's something that we need to do.
Sparkling lights, things like that. Okay, that's great. Thank you for the update, Sam.
Was that just an update? Can we throw some questions out, or?
Sure, absolutely. Speak on.
I was just interested in the ways it addresses affordable housing. I think I read that it was targeted towards 60% or lower of the median income. Like, is there anything more to that, or is that just a goal in terms of who we're looking for? Are there any requirements or anything past that?
Sure, yeah, I can answer that. Ohio Finance, through what the acronym they use is LIHTC, the Low Income Housing Tax Credit. LIHTC is the acronym. That actually, I believe, has a 15-year requirement that the property maintain a defined rent cost for that 15 years. So that's probably something we will report when it comes to City Council, and maybe from there kind of test the waters as to whether that is satisfactory enough for City Council, or there needs to be something separate. I lean towards referencing the funding mechanism as the requirement rather than actually having a separate requirement. That way, if they don't get the funding, the project doesn't happen. We don't have to worry about enforcing it. So that just kind of puts it all in one bucket. Steve's got his hand raised.
And I just wanted to say about Episcopal retirement homes. When I first became acquainted with them 40 years ago in Cincinnati, they ran very upscale retirement communities for retirees. And because of their nonprofit and church affiliation, it was their board who told them, we really need to get into lower income housing. So they have done so, and now have a number of properties that are low income and are doing extremely well. I think I remember hearing that they've done almost a dozen projects with Model Group. So they team very nicely together, but it's not their intention just to run out a 15-year contractual obligation. What they want to do is to maintain low-income housing for older adults. And I find that very, very, not only beyond acceptable, I find it commendable that they're doing so on a mission basis. And I believe that, and I think that we can bank on that being what their intention will be.
Yeah, I can also speak to ERS. In 2015, they came to Oxford to meet with Younghan, and I was in on that meeting. And they've been interested in Oxford itself for that long. So they have a real interest in being up here, and like the area, and feel they can really serve Oxford to the best of their ability. We took a drive. At that time, we took a drive through the city, and they were looking at different spaces and options and places that they could redevelop. And they really do have a commitment, as Steve said, to lower income housing for seniors.
And
That's
Jason,
great to hear. Yeah, and I wasn't doubting it. I just wanted to know like what we have in place to assure that, because that's a major goal, right? Yeah, that's fantastic. Now slap some solar panels up there and I'll be really happy.
if you did want to see their full proposal, you might have to make a public records request. Since it was just the one, we would probably be able to release it. But Jason, it does have a lot of the details I think you'd be interested in, as far as, you know, how it's financed, what the rents are, you know, how they did their study. They probably didn't include all the proprietary information, but, you know, at least, you know, some of the details that would be helpful for you to feel better when it does come to city council. You could put in, I think you could put in a records request to Mary Ann, and we could review it and see if we could release the whole document.
That would be great. Yeah, I'm really interested, obviously in the affordable housing side, but also the environmental stuff, you know. And I'm not trying to change all the plans, obviously, but if there's room for environmental issues being addressed there too, through solar or geothermal. And also there have been members of the public who've reached out to me with concern about keeping some of the natural areas in the spaces in between whatever we do with the property.
Okay.
But obviously this is a good thing.
Okay, further comment? Alrighty, cottage community, Sam?
Well, I wanted to report that the new Serve City Director, I heard from Mindy Muller with Community Development Professionals. She was able to connect with the new director, who was the proposed operator for the cottage community to be located at Hester Road. They are interested in additional housing, so that's a plus for us, because at least in the application for the county funding, they were intended to be the owner and operator for the facility, which of course hasn't moved forward, primarily because of county home funding was not allocated to federal funding. So that's good to have that confirmation. The CARES Act funding did motivate some discussion, some communication that I had with Mindy also. We were not able to find a good fit for that because it just simply can't be spent that quickly. So that did motivate some interest in, hey, why don't they give us at least an estimate on what some preliminary engineering would cost? Because one of the things I've found with much of these kind of social service type of projects, and in any kind of public project really, is if you don't have a reliable estimate on some of the developments that is done by qualified professionals, it's hard to really get donations and extra grant money. So whether or not the city would be the one to actually pay for some of those things remains to be seen. But I did ask for an estimate for preliminary engineering, which includes surveying, utilities, and infrastructure. And for a project of that size, you know, it could be 50 or 100,000 for that. They haven't responded yet, but I did want to let you know that we've got the ball on their court, if you will, to respond back on that. And whether or not that city funding or not, we don't know, but I at least asked for the number. So not a whole lot of movement since the last time. The funding is still going to be mostly home, which would be a federal ask through the county. So we would probably need your advocacy when it comes to that. You might also want to suggest that the city have some skin in the game too, because that would probably mean a lot to the county since it didn't go well the last round. So that's really the only update that I have, and I can answer any questions you might have. If you remember, this was the 12-unit development for more of the kind of concept of transitional housing. They're basically like essentially an RV with a house skin on the outside. So it's about a 400 square foot building that is either stick built or pre-built, and they would be spaced out on a property to kind of create a small neighborhood for people to experience community, but also have some stability if they're in transition. And it could be, the intention was that some of the units be for longer term usage, and the majority, or at least a little bit more than the majority, would be for a more transitional use.
this might be pertinent here. I understand that the county still has a considerable amount of CARES Act money that has not been allocated. And considering that they had redirected the $75,000, I believe that was the same $75,000 that they had set aside for the small houses project that they gave to the homeless coalition to use, that we may be able to encourage them to replenish that in some way.
I can ask about that and just see find out a little bit more about that. Thanks.
Yeah, Sam, do you think that maybe some of that undistributed CARES money could be used for that engineering study and think, I mean, that would be something that they could order and pay for and have done. Could they have it done by the end of the year?
Most architects and engineers would need a few months of lead time, but if they could get a contract and get it started, perhaps even 50% of the work. A lot of times when you hire a consultant, they want upfront payment on contract signing. So yeah, I think I'll take Steve's comment and yours, Sherry, and follow up on it with Desmond Miata and just see what his feedback is. He's the county development director, kind of my equivalent. So
That sounds great. I mean, if there's an opportunity there and we still have needs and they also have money they have to spend before it disappears, then that might be great to look into.
okay.
And just to confirm, Sam, when you talked about an RV, you didn't mean they were mobile. You just meant in terms of like square footage.
Actually, they are mobile. What they do is they remove the wheels and then they put a skirting on it. But when I say RV, it's manufactured in a factory versus built on site. So I've actually stayed in one on a camping trip down the Smoky Mountains, and it looks like a little cabin. You don't even know that it was built in a factory until you see the little decal by the front door and you go inside and you kind of tell that everything is shrunk down a little bit. The idea that Mindy was going with was actually a stick built or built on site. I like the pre-built better because it can be done much quicker. And then when you're over with, if you do need to move them, you can. But I don't think it really matters. I just like the pre-built units. I've been inside them. They're solid, so I think it makes sense.
Can the pre-built units be purchased and held for installation at appropriate site during this time frame crunch?
Good question. Yeah, I don't know if I could have an answer to that.
So
Jason, if you want to know more about tiny houses, it was an idea that was started in Australia about 20 years ago. And they were initially used as mother-in-law places for putting in the backyards of people's homes so that they could move their parents in proximity to the home without moving them into the home themselves. And has been for a while, very popular on the coasts for that specific use. They're used a lot. And they can there are organizations that rent them and put them in the backyard. And then should the parent die, then they come and get them and take them away. But the problem with those is there's usually not running water or electricity run out to them. But they also now, there are people who are now putting them in the backyards, and then should the appropriate parent pass, then they use them for other purposes. And they vary in cost. The original cost used to be to get them into the backyard was around $6,000 to $10,000. The cost has skyrocketed since they've become more popular.
yeah, my understanding was in Australia, and maybe it's changed definitions and building models since then. But I know of like tiny home communities in Utah and the Pacific Northwest to deal with homelessness, which is a little bit different. So my interest around the actual build is that, yeah, like for example, mobile homes, not that this is a mobile home, but it might get very close if it's mobile. they're the only type of home that depreciates, right? It's basically like purchasing a car. Every year you have it, it's worth less and less and less. You can't just resell it and regain your money or even add some to it, which is different than normal housing. And so I don't mind small homes. In fact, I think in many areas it's a great idea, but it would be great if we knew that they would maintain value. Any thoughts on that, Sam?
I like the idea of it, but I just don't think that's the application here. I think a better application would be, to carve out a section of Western Knolls for people who want to live there permanently, who are already here. They just want to live more simple and have less of a footprint on the environment or whatever the case may be. And I think that's a better application of what you're looking at there. And that would probably be a site-built one. And because I think the people that would be investing in that type of thing are exactly in agreement with what you're saying, is that it does depreciate. But I think for Surf City and that type of transitional use, if the owner and operator chooses to use a pre-built building, I think that's really up to them. Probably better that we wouldn't, weigh in on that.
But doesn't Serve City still have an agreement to purchase on Hester Road?
I don't think anything has been put in writing. They have a verbal from the owner. But as far as I know, that's as far as they've gotten on it.
From someone who has lived in 400 square feet, one should try it before one makes a commitment to it. Not a lot of room.
I'm doing great in my dorm.
Yeah, well, yes. You're still a graduate student. Let me know when you're earning. Okay, moving, that's the cottage community. Now we can go down to new business topics and status check in of our 2020 goals. I was hoping to do this with all of us here. I'm not really, we can go through it, but I think there are things that people have committed to who aren't here, so we can go through it. Okay, can we, does everybody have a copy of it in front of them?
No, I was hoping, Sam, maybe you could do a screen share.
Oh,
Yep, we can do that.
perfect. Thank you, Steve. Okay, can everybody see that? Oops. Thank you, sir. Much better for old eyes. Okay, number one, explore drafting incentive requirements for assuring current and new housing programs remain affordable and are not converted to market rate by reserving and or preserving a percentage of units as affordable, i.e. set-asides applied to discretionary approvals of residential developments, including planned developments and major subdivisions. One such incentive could be a density bonus. Shauna, you want to speak to that?
Sure, I was muted. I actually don't know anything further. If anything further has happened, Sam could best update us on that.
Okay. Mr. Perry?
No, but continue asking, because one of these days we're gonna say, yes, we have made progress on that.
Okay, is there anything that we need, have we done as much as we could with this point for 2020, or is there something else that the city needs from us to help do this?
I'm not aware of anything that staff needs. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, point two, explore drafting legislation that would penalize non-performing and or vacant commercial properties. Look into whether the definition of commercial properties can be expanded to cover investor-owned residential rental units being utilized as a business. investigate reclassifying student housing from residential to commercial to ensure properties are performing, as well as the consideration of the mitigation of vacant rentals by having some type of fine or penalty related to above. This is something that Glenn spoke to at length at the last meeting, but I'm not aware that anything has been talked about in terms of drafting legislation. Sam, is Glenn allowed to draft legislation?
Oh, of course. He is.
Okay.
I think the advice from our law director was that this would not be recommended based on our level of risk averseness. So we would need to approach it in a different way, rather than directly linking it to vacancy. You would have to be something else. And the something else is what has not been determined, other than property maintenance conditions, which I think some of the properties that Glenn is talking about don't have maintenance issues. So our current position from the staff is that this is not recommended, but that doesn't stop Glenn from drafting legislation if that's something that he'd like to do.
Okay, all right. All right, so I can take it up with Glenn. Explore creation of a home purchase assistance program and potentially recruit partners to ensure adequate resources, capacity, and administering such a program. This could be set up as a forgivable loan program where the balance owed goes away after a certain number of years and diminishes on a pro rata basis. Steve, you were sort of coming at this from a different direction. Were you not looking at possible partners?
I remember saying that there were organizations who do some of this, and that we may be able to reach out to them and become involved. I certainly still like the idea very much. And I'm curious to know what the housing purchase rate has been in the Oxford area this year, since we're just pretty much finishing a sales phase. I also, my bias is that I believe the university should be investing in something like this along with us. And I don't think this is a time to ask them for that, unfortunately.
Well, if you could just get down on paper your ideas about who partners and possibly the university. I mean, there's no harm in just getting it down on paper, whether this is the time or not. At least we know that we've thought about it, and just sort of take this point and see how much you can think of that we can propose for, at least show that we've been working on it. Is that a lot to ask?
I'll do my best. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Okay. And point 4, support the city's development of an RFP for the 47-acre Western Knolls property by defining site-specific goals which fulfill community needs, which should include a diversity of housing types and price points to ensure an increased supply of affordable units. Sam, how have we done on that?
I think you've done all you can.
Okay.
I mean, I appreciate the questions. Jason had a lot of detailed questions. We're still waiting for the housing needs analysis or housing study to be done. I think that followed by the development of Western Knolls will show that you're taking action. And by listing these goals out, I think it keeps them in front of council. So yeah, I think you've done all you can. And the way that you're approaching this, Sherry, with updates, I think it helps keep everything on the forefront of everyone's mind, and we can continue tweaking, and chipping away at these things.
Okay, great. Point 5, investigate ways in which the city could alleviate issues surrounding housing instability, housing assistance, and homelessness, including potentially exploring the development of a homeless shelter, at the very least finding an existing place that can support this function in some capacity. I think today's discussion was very on point here. And does anybody think that there's that there, just in terms of additional ideas or something we can add to this point, or the fact that we just need to keep everybody updated? Do we think that we've sort of pretty much covered it? Steve, you unmuted?
Yeah, I did, because I was thinking about how Scott had told us that in October or so would be a good time to find out about the rental rates of all of the rental properties, and possibly we could even consider that becoming an annual thing to do, so we could watch the comparables. And considering that there's this immediate concern that there may be fewer students living in town going into the future, it may be the beginning of a time when there will be other properties that'll be coming back onto the market for longer term residents.
Well, and in addition to that, in addition to a update from Scott, it would also be very handy to know step by step what the university is thinking. I'm not sure how we get that information. Because therein lies the rub. Okay, so Sam, how do you think we've done so far on our 5 goals for 2020?
Very good. Yeah, I think that the goals and the progress are reflective of how active this commission has been, and I know the council realizes it. So yeah, I'd say very good.
Okay. All
Nicole
right.
has her hand raised.
Oh, Nicole, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to add that the money from the Housing Trust Fund that the FRC received, we've spent, to be precise, 5,775. So almost the whole thing on rental assistance and hotel stays.
Well, we were glad to help.
We're very thankful for that support.
Okay. All right. So my clock on my computer says 2:29. Can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn. please.
Okay, Jason
Second.
and Shauna seconds. Okay, roll call. Steve,
Aye.
Jason,
Yes.
Shauna,
Yes.
Nicola,
Yes.
and me, yes. Okay, meeting adjourned at 2:29. Thank everybody very much. And I'll see if I can get in touch with Glenn to see if we can work on point 2. Sam, that's okay if I talk to him directly about that, right? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. All right, everybody, thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you next month, if not before.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.